Hi, my name is Chris. I work with ABC. I'm based in San Diego. I lived in Tucson for many years with my wife, and we moved to San Diego so I could take this job. We still have our house, and we hope to get back as soon as we can. Giving this talk means a lot to me. My first bird job ever was on the Gila River, just over the border in New Mexico, on the Gila Lower Box, I think it's called. And I worked on Bell's vireos. I didn't know any birds then. I had these Bushnell binoculars that I had since I was 8 years old. I didn't use them, I hated them. And I didn't know any birds. I knew Bell's vireos and I knew cowbirds because I had to lay low when there were cowbirds around. But that was the bug. And from there I worked with the Point Reyes Bird Observatory, now it's called Point Blue, for a long time, and now I'm with ABC. I also, that first summer here, this is my favorite place in the world. I worked in Silver City. If you've ever been to the college there, at the library, there's a mosaic outside. I worked on that with Robert Stout. My dad's a tile guy. And then I worked at a coffee shop there, and then I was driving past the research station. I wanted to see the Chiricahua, so I drove down one day, saw the station. I was like, this is great. How do you get a job there? So I just drove in. I was like, who runs the place? And it was Wade Sherbrooke, and he gave me a job, and so I lived there that fall. So this is my spot. I wanted to give a shout out to Jenny Duberstein's Sonoran joint venture. So I think she was gonna give this talk and she couldn't make it. So there's all these migratory bird joint ventures across the country. There's like a Rocky Mountain joint venture and a Rio Grande joint venture. I think this location here is actually inside of the Rio Grande joint venture's boundary, I think. But I work with Jenny a lot. She's based in Tucson, so the Sonoran joint venture goes from southern Arizona, southern California, down into Sonora and Baja and Sinaloa. And so these are people that all work together on trying to raise funding to implement projects that help bird conservation in this region. And so I'm just really proud to be here and proud of Jenny's work and happy that I can hopefully represent her in some form for this talk. This is kind of my background. So all these yellow dots are my study sites across the region. And I've worked on like Inyo California towhees around Ridgecrest in the Mojave Desert. It's a subspecies that's threatened. I worked for many years on willow flycatchers and dusky flycatchers at Mona Lake. I've got a long-term project at the Amargosa River near Death Valley on Bell's vireos. I don't know if there's a pointer on this or not, but anyway, up in the top left. And then I had a lot of dots here in southeastern California and southwest Arizona. I was working with the BLM and Arizona Game and Fish on the washes in those habitats. So that's a Ben Dyer's thrasher there. So this is my area. I'm talking a lot today about the State of the Birds report. Every couple of years, bird conservation organizations put these out. American Bird Conservancy, the Klamath Bird Observatory, Cornell University, we all work together on these things. And it's really kind of a check-in, how are our birds doing? My old boss at Point Blue would tell me that he thought of these as sort of like a stock market report for investors. So we've invested in these conservation projects, how are they doing? How are the birds not doing? Where do we need more help? What's going well? That kind of thing. And so, and another feature of these reports is to talk about how important birds are economically. And this always kind of blows me away because I think of myself as kind of a nerd. I love birds. I still can't wrap my mind around how popular bird watching is becoming. So one of the parts of these reports is they have an analysis that talks about the economic impacts of birds. So we write these reports and we distribute them to other bird biologists, universities, but also policymakers, trying to show them that these conservation projects that they help fund actually help with economies. So altogether, you're looking at almost $300 billion annually generated from bird watching, bird tours, bird equipment, $38 billion in taxes, $1.4 million jobs. And so it's a big deal, and I always try to include this in my talks. This is always surprising even to me. I never think about it usually, but it's a big deal. The report talks about, again, how the birds are doing. We look at trends, and we're working with all the species. So we divide the species into groups. Things like diving ducks and dabbling ducks, grassland birds. eastern forest birds, western forest birds, shorebirds, wading birds, and then arid land birds. So I was on the science team that worked on the arid land section of the report. And you can see here on the chart, arid land birds is the red here, and since 1970, we've lost about 40% of our bird population for this group of birds. From year to year, this group of birds is always kind of performing among the worst. So the thing that I spent my career working on, they're not doing very well. And so we wanted to talk about why they might be in the report. When you crack open the report, this is what you see. So each of the groups has its own sort of write-up. So grassland birds, arid land birds. We talk about the trends. There's a trend map. We talk about what's going well. This year, they wanted us to focus on unexpected partnerships. So for arid land birds, there's a Ben Dyer's thrasher there in the corner. We have a small write-up on how we're trying to work with solar companies because of all the solar development out here to try to get them to institute thrasher surveys and try, if they can, develop these things around thrasher habitat. Right now, thrashers, they've been petitioned to be listed. They're not listed, so they're not really protected by anything. So it's up to just voluntary help. So we've been trying to work with some of these companies to help thrashers. Because we have all these species we're thinking about, we divide them up into groups, sort of correlated to how worried we are about them. So the red alert birds those are birds with low populations, and those populations are experiencing steep declines. So they're birds that we think could very well wind up being listed if things don't turn around. Orange alert birds are birds that they've been declining for a while, but for some reason, there's different reasons, now they're declining very rapidly. And so we're worried about those becoming red alert species eventually. Yellow alert species are species that have just been declining and declining forever. Maybe not fire drill decline rates, but there's no end in sight. They just keep going down. And then in the report, we highlight some species where we thought they were doing well, but then recently looking at the data, they're experiencing steep declines. So we want to spotlight those species. Maybe there are ways we can help those species before it becomes more difficult and more expensive to try to help them. There's more about these species groups and how they're defined. I wanted to provide, there's a website here in the bottom. Luckily, this is being recorded. And after this, you can always come to me with these websites that I'm trying to show you so you can read up on this stuff afterwards. This is something called Road to Recovery. It's a program, an initiative it's kind of headed by the Smithsonian, Dr. Peter Mara, and a lot of universities, where they're looking at full life cycle conservation, trying to find the point during the full year, whether it's breeding or migration or wintering, where bird species are being constrained. If we can find that bottleneck and pinpoint it, maybe we can help these birds more than just by, say, restoring wintering habitat or somewhere. So they're looking at the full year, and they talk about these tipping point species a lot. The other thing I wanted to show you, not to get in the weeds, but to give you a paper trail, how do we know what's declining rapidly and what's not? How do you decide what's a red species and an orange species? So this is called the Avian Conservation Assessment and Population Estimate Database. It's organized by Partners in Flight, another national group devoted to bird conservation, and the Bird Conservancy of the Rockies, which used to be called the Rocky Mountain Bird Observatory. So they work on this all the time, updating population estimates every year for the species. And so the website's here. It's long. I can get that to you later. But the other thing I wanted to point out is that these are our best data sources are these volunteer citizen science efforts. So the Breeding Bird Survey is organized by the U.S. Geologic Survey, but it's all volunteers going out every year to do these 25-mile long routes. And then there's eBird, where you can go set up an account with Cornell. Every time you go out bird watching, you count your birds for each species, you put it in your phone, you have a checklist, and people use these data all the time. Every second, we're getting more and more data. So that's a great source. And then Christmas bird counts is another good long-term source of data. So it's really those big data sets are the underpinning of these trends that I'm giving you. That's where it comes from. And this whole website, they have this whole methodology that's pretty intense, and you can find out more about it there. So back to arid land birds. So we focused on 31 species of birds that were really, their whole life cycle was tied to arid land habitats. Of those 31 species, 17 have been declining since 1970. The other 14 are stable. None of them are increasing. And you'll see in things like this, 1970 as the sort of beginning of the window. And that's really when the BBS, or the USGS Breeding Bird Survey program, got its legs and started really getting in data. So that's why 1970 is the starting point for a lot of these data sets. If you take all 31 species as an aggregate, overall their populations have gone down around 41% since 1970. So not doing well. And then the report has this trend map, and so this shows you all the arid lands. So we're talking about the Great Basin, and then the shrub steppe habitats east of the Great Basin in Wyoming and Colorado, northern New Mexico, the Chihuahuan Desert, the Sonoran Desert, the Mojave Desert, and the coastal chaparral in California, where I live now. The red dots are decreases, the blue dots are increases. The bigger the dot, the more pronounced the change. So you can see, and this is between 2012 and 2022. So this data, this is based on 1970 onwards. This is a smaller window because it just uses eBird data. And that's really when eBird kind of got going. So, and I look at this map, and I want to talk to the doctor, the climatologist that was speaking this morning, because when I see this map, I look at precipitation maps all the time. I work in the desert. I think about it constantly for birds. And, all of my study sites are where it's the most red. And so I would look at these precip maps all the time, and I would notice that in this time period, it was really dry here, but there were quite a few wet years, especially from sort of New Mexico eastward. During that period, I was jealous of them. I was like, oh man, I wish we got rain like that. So when I see this, I suspect that what you're seeing here is a bit of precipitation during that 2012, 2022 window. So I'd love to work with that doctor to find out if I'm right about that. That's what I suspect is a lot of what's happening here with that pattern. So looking at specific species, for red alert species, again, low populations and really steep declines. So Allen's hummingbird, Ridgway's, it's so hard to say, Ridgway's rail, greater sage grouse, Bendar's thrasher, and LeConte's thrasher. So Ridgway's is listed already. Greater sage grouse, Bendar's, and LeConte's have been petitioned, I think greater sage grouse multiple times. So these are species that we're quite worried about in our region, and we spend a lot of time trying to find ways to recover their populations. Orange alert, Peloncillo. So this is a species where they've been declining, and we find that looking at, I think mostly eBird data, they're declining quite a bit more rapidly now. And I love these. Rebecca, one of the biologists on our team, she works with the Rio Grande joint venture. She suspected that a lot of the decline was related to energy development in sort of their key areas in Texas. And I don't know if she's right, but that was her take on it, her hot take on it. There could be other reasons, but we're starting to worry about this species now. Yellow alert species, these are birds that have been declining for a long period again, maybe not at the fastest rate, but it's still worrisome. Pinyon jay has been petitioned for listing. The Fish and Wildlife Service is deliberating on that now. Sagebrush sparrow, Grace's warbler, Chihuahuan meadowlark, and black-chinned sparrow are all birds that are not really doing all that well over a long period. And then these are species that we thought were doing fairly well, but we find that maybe not. And so rufous ground sparrow, you find those sort of in upland, grassland habitats in the Sky Islands, and scaled quail have been experiencing some pretty alarming declines over the last few years. So we highlight those in the report. And so why? Why are the birds not doing well? And so it's really habitat loss. Since 1968, the West has lost about half of its arid land habitat. And there's different kinds of habitat loss. So this sequence of photographs I find useful. This is from the San Diego Museum of Natural History. They were looking for LeConte's thrashers around Palm Springs in the Coachella Valley. There used to be numerous there, but they can't find them anymore. They're extirpated. So why? Why is that? So here, the top photographs are from 1970, or the 1970s, and they went back to these spots and photographed them. So on the left, one kind of habitat loss is urbanization, just development. Now you have, first you have LeConte's thrasher habitat, now it's a subdivision and some gravel. And our region has some of the fastest growing cities in the country, Phoenix and Las Vegas and Palm Springs and Tucson. So we're losing habitat that way. A more diffuse problem, but still a problem, is losing habitat through things like increased fire frequency in the desert. That's fueled by exotic forbs and grasses that are more fire adapted. So here, you've got Lacan's thrasher habitat on the top, and it's kind of hard to see. You can see it maybe easier on this left photograph where these dark sort of pegs are cholla. So Lacan's thrashers are the most arid Toxostoma thrasher. You think of valley bottoms, sand dunes, sparse habitats, creosote flats. But you find, if you look closer, that there's actually quite a bit of small cholla in that creosote. It's often like under knee high. Doesn't matter, they'll use it for nesting all the time. That's their favorite thing. So since the 1970s, there's been a couple fires here. All this brown stuff is Sahara mustard, which is an exotic, and it spreads fires pretty easily. You can kind of tell from how dense it is there. So we've lost the cholla at that location. So they think that's one of the reasons why we've lost Lacan's thrashers. Even when there's still habitat, there isn't habitat. Then you've got solar development. This is the Riverside East Solar Energy Zone. It's west of Blythe on I-10. So this is very rapid development, and it's pretty easy to grade and level valley bottoms in the desert. And this is exactly where Lacan's thrashers and Bendire's thrashers want to be. You don't find those thrashers in rocky habitats, they're in the valley bottoms. So now they're being displaced by acres and acres and acres of solar fields, and we need renewable energy, but there is only so much of this, and the thrashers are kind of losing it. And then fires, this is in Mojave National Preserve. This is from the Dome Fire in 2021. These are all Joshua trees that are burned. This was several tens of thousands of acres that burned in that fire. There was another one more recently called the York Fire. So the Bendire's thrasher has been experiencing a range contraction in the Mojave Desert where you don't find them as far west as you used to. And the Mojave Preserve is one of their strongholds, but we just zapped 150,000 acres or something over the last few years. And this is going to take decades and decades for Joshua trees. They're not fire adapted. So this is another way we're losing habitat. This screenshot's from the Watch Duty app where you can go online and see where the fires are. And it's a little hard to see, but the pale blotches are burn scars from recent years. And so this is the Arizona upland desert habitat outside of Phoenix. Every spring it's become a ritual now where you see another, I don't know how many thousands of acres of saguaro habitat that's been burned by fires. And again, these are not fire-adapted habitats. And even where I live in San Diego County, you have coastal chaparral, and those have resinous leaves on the plants that they are fire-adapted. But it takes around 20 years for the chaparral to sort of return after a fire. But the fire frequency is faster than that now. You've got exotic fuel, or plants that are fuel fires, and then you have more people just in these places starting fires for different reasons. So even habitats that are fire adapted, they're eventually getting converted into grass. So instead of having California thrashers and bell sparrows, you have grass. And so this is a problem throughout our region. And then you have invasives like this. This is called stinknet. So all this yellow stuff is stinknet. It's a new invasive plant. This is north of Phoenix. And it's obviously, you're not gonna have a lot of native wildflowers growing, trying to compete through this. And it is a fire threat. And I think, if I'm correct, when it burns, there's some sort of chemical in the resin when it burns, and it's caustic for humans. So it's also a health threat. So for me, like studying birds out here, I'm like, stink. What is stinknet? Like, what's next year? Like disaster berry? Like, what's the next thing that's going to happen? So it's just every year is a new thing. It wears you down a little bit. You saw this map this morning. So drought is a big problem for birds. This is what I studied for my thesis at Arizona with Charles Van Riper. So when you have drought conditions, first you get short nesting seasons. So if it's really dry, we need that winter precipitation. If we don't get it, there's not as much food in the habitat, and so the birds might not start nesting. Sometimes they won't nest at all. They'll just skip the entire season. Certain species will do that. more often in certain places. Most of the time in the Sonoran Desert, they'll nest, but they just delay for like 3 weeks even, or 4 weeks, right? So you've lost a big chunk of your nesting season, and that's the time of the year when nesting success tends to be the highest. So you have a delayed beginning, and then you have a shorter end. So often birds, if they fail, they'll try to re-nest, maybe many times until they can get out some chicks. But if it's really dry, there's no food, they might try once and then give up. I gotta forget about laying more eggs, I gotta feed myself, whatever. So you have a short nesting season, you lay fewer eggs in your clutches. You tend to have higher depredation and lower nesting success during dry years. Things like cactus wrens might focus more on bird nests because there's not any insects around to feed their babies. And then in addition, like say you have to make 500 trips to your nest to feed your babies in a regular year. But if it's dry, you might make 1,000 trips. So that's more times a predator might see you going to your nest because you're delivering less food with each trip. So that's the problem for birds. For the fledglings, when you've got new fledglings out there, they have to learn how to feed. But when it's July and 121 degrees and there's no food, they're not going to have much success teaching themselves how to feed. So you have lower fledgling survival. And then you can have decreased winter survival. So I work on leaf-spells vireos. They all winter at the southern end of Baja California. And we found that between last year and this year, when the birds were coming back, people were reporting 20%, 25% declines. So we're putting all this effort into trying to recover them, fixing habitat, trapping cowbirds, doing all these things, and then we get zapped 20% of the population. Well, why? And it seems that it was dry in Baja, plus a lot of Baja, a lot of its precipitation comes from tropical storms. They didn't happen to get any in 2024. So it was just dry down there. So, and again, all of the birds from that subspecies are crammed in this little area. So that can happen to you. And then you can have just extreme events where if you have a hot spell, where you have record temperatures over like 4 or 5 days. So you have drought plus hot temperatures. The birds are getting a lot of the water from the insects they eat. Now they've got to somehow survive a drought, so you have increased mortality that way. So that's another thing that's affecting arid birds. So how can we help our arid bird populations? And Kim, I forgot to start my timer. How much time do I have left?
You got 8 minutes.
8 minutes? Okay, cool. So I started to make this slide, and then I started to brainstorm ways that we could help arid land birds. It's not easy. I don't know. Every year it seems like we lose more habitat, all these, but I'm an optimist, and I think that there are ways that we'll never give up. We can find ways to help our arid land birds. The biggest one to me is that we have to find ways to keep working. It's more important, more than ever, to work together, and we work hard to find new partners. So a lot of the bird conservation groups are working with tribes more than they used to, with ranchers, with farmers. These are all people that love birds and they want to help birds. How can we help them help birds? One of the people that I supervise now is what's called a partner biologist with the NRCS. The NRCS is a federal agency, and they deliver funding to private landowners for conservation actions, whether it's like removing tamarisk or creating what are they called, beaver dam analogs, so you can hold back water on your land, removing other exotic vegetation, building fences so that you can manage cattle away from certain areas with more direction. So we spend a lot of time. I train my partner biologist, Quentin, to work with ranchers in Southern California to find ways that they can help birds. And his whole mission, he works in riparian habitats, is to help ranchers help birds in riparian habitats. So you're seeing more of that from conservation groups than you used to. But I think that it just is going to take everybody working together and not giving up. Because as a bird biologist, since I've been out here, my entire career has been in that drought we were talking about this morning. I got out here in 98. I think she was saying that the drought in Arizona started in 94. I think it's a little later in California maybe, but about the same time. So for me, the few years that I've been out there with really big wet years, they almost like destroy my brain. So I'm like, I wish it could always be like that. And so I have observed birds across a lot of my study sites that they're no longer there. I worked at willow flycatchers at Mono Lake. They're not there anymore. I worked at Ben Dyer's thrashers. We had a plot across the Colorado from Lake Havasu City is a big wash system in California called the Chemehuevi Wash. And I had nest searchers working out there from 2003 to 2008. When I first started doing that work, there wasn't a lot of desert research that I could draw on. Like, I didn't know exactly when my study season should be because I didn't have anybody to tell me. I had to figure it out. And so we were out there, and we had Ben Dyer's thrashers on the Chemehuevi. We had, I think, over like 3 years, like 8 or 9 nests. And I looked it up, where else in California? And at that time, there had been only 8 nests found ever in California. And we had more. But now they're not there anymore. Point Blue was doing a lot of thrasher work in the 2010s in that area, and they couldn't find them. I mentioned the LeConte thrasher example where they used to be in the Coachella Valley. And now they're not there. So I've observed how this is happening, but I just never give up. You just can't give up. So that might sound not superlative, superfluous. Is that the word? I'm more of a bird guy than a vocabularian. But anyway, so it's real. We have to keep working together and not give up on our birds. And if you have people in your area that are doing things to help habitat, all I can say is volunteer and help them. All of these citizen projects, whether it's getting bird data for eBird or actually doing habitat restoration actions, we have to rely on each other more than ever because of some recent cuts in budgets. And so we have to keep working together on this because our birds only have so much habitat. And so I guess that's it. I hope I didn't overrun it. Again, I meant to time it, but I forgot. Okay, and is there time for questions?